We're still waiting. Christine, David Pafford and Hannah as well, the others.
So who is asking the questions? We are individually. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know how.
The biggest distraction.
Sean's got a copy of all the questions. I circulated all the questions to all the panel council panel members earlier, so I don't know how you want to do it.
I have printed them all off, as we should do. Who cares about paper when you're paying for it?
I guess Terry maybe
not the council, that is.
do an introduction, or Dominic maybe do an introduction once we're.
I'm sure he's able to. Yeah. Sure he's able to. You're back, Terry. Good.
I'm back. Sean, how are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good. I don't think I know the other officer.
Hello, Chris Smith.
Hey, Chris.
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
Not too bad.
What area do you normally work?
I've got Netherfield, Eaglestone, Tinkers and Pear Tree.
Oh, right. Okay. So you know my wife.
Good luck.
So you'll know my wife.
Right, I just said good luck.
Yeah, my wife Julie's over at Woughton Community Council with the environment officer. You trust my councillors to be late, can't you?
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them.
Right, I can confirm we are now streaming, so that's all okay.
I will try and get on it now.
Evening, the combined forces of the local constabulary.
Evening, Dominic.
How are we doing?
Yes, very well, thank you. Very well.
Good. How many of these forums have you done locally now?
We've done one with Woughton, and there's another one that's planned over in Middleton as well.
Okay.
And then there's another Woughton one we've got on Wednesday as well. So the Woughton one was a bit of a trial to see how it went.
Yeah.
And it was really good, really successful, and hence us trying to push out a bit more widely, because even with the lockdown easing, the restrictions around us holding face-to-face meetings are probably going to be in place for some time.
Sure.
And I mean, this seems to work well. I mean, it's got its limitations, granted, but actually it could be quite effective as well. So
Yeah, I think so, because there's some people that might actually find the physical meeting quite intimidating, and they might feel kind of comfortable to do this, or there might be that person's got an issue, they can't get out of the house, things like that. So I think it's quite inclusive to have this virtual platform as well.
Yeah, and I think what we'll probably end up with is a mix. In the long term, a bit of a mix between this and the more traditional face-to-face meetings as well.
Yeah.
And that's really just trying to harness the legacy that comes from this pandemic, and use some smarter ways of working and some different ways of doing things to try and make things better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, these are not going to go away full stop, are they? Because it's saving time and money.
Yeah.
Dominic, have you seen the message from Carl Cavarana?
Evening, Nana.
Good evening.
Evening.
So what's the message from Carl?
He wanted he needs to get onto the Teams meeting, or I think he needs to view it from YouTube, aren't they? Or are they coming on here?
No, he should. All members should have.
Right, well, he hasn't got. He can't find. It's not coming up on his Teams, apparently.
All right, I'll extend the invite to him.
Thank you.
Good evening, councillors.
Evening, David.
David.
So I'm a bit late. I thought it was starting at 7, actually.
Yeah, no, 6:30. So who are we missing? We are missing
Crispina.
Crispina and that's it, Crispina.
That's it as far as the reps are concerned, yeah.
Yeah.
There's 5 people currently watching on YouTube, so I don't know whether that's us
One
or
of them's
multiple
me.
screens.
One of them is me.
One of them's me.
That'd be me as well.
Now,
It won't be me because I'm not bothering with that.
No cats yet, so this is looking promising.
I was hoping there would be.
All right, Terry or Dominic,
Carl.
if one of you want to do an introduction before we start?
Yes, I can do that.
Those watching on
If you want me to.
YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Terry Baines. I'm the Chair of Council, and I will be representing Fishermead on the panel this evening, joined by Thames Valley Police. If you'd like to just introduce yourselves, guys, please.
Yeah, of course. I'm Sergeant Ross Keenick. I am the neighbourhood sergeant that's responsible for Campbell Park South. I'm actually responsible for a quarter of Milton Keynes, but Campbell Park South is one of my areas.
I'm PC Chris Smith. I'm currently neighbourhood supervisor of the Campbell Park South and Woughton area.
I'm Sharon Terrett. I'm one of the officers that covers Campbell Park and Woughton.
Thank you very much. We've got other members here from Campbell Park. So can we start with you, Brian, to introduce yourself, please?
Good evening. I am Brian Greenwood. I'm Vice Chair of Campbell Park Parish Council and I'm representing Oldbrook, where I reside.
Thank you. Nana?
I'm Nana Oguntola. I'm representing Springfield. Thank you.
Thank you. And Crispina?
Good evening, I'm Crispina Odewu and I'm representing Willen.
And David?
Good evening all. My name's David Pafford. I'm representing Woolstone and that's where I currently live. Many thanks.
Thank you. Dominic?
Thank you, Chair. Just very excited this evening to have our first ever police community forum. I'm the parish clerk, Dominic, and let's have a good evening. Thank you.
And Tracy?
I'm Tracy Jones. I'm the community officer. I have been collating the questions we've received from the members of the public in advance, and we'll be watching on the YouTube stream for any questions we receive live. So if we receive any questions through live, I'll put my hands up on the Teams thing so I can let you know what the questions are.
Thank you very much, Tracy. What we hope to get from tonight is responses to questions from residents and from councillors, which I'm hoping the police team have had notification of. I've got a specific question I need to ask the team shortly, regards to the 39 emails I've had in the last 5 months about the one issue. So what I'm going to do is carry on now, and I don't know what order you want to answer these questions in, Sean, but and if you want us to read them out or you want to read them out because you've got them there now, then maybe comment on them one at a time, please.
I'd be really happy, Terry, if the individual councillors wanted to run through their questions or any questions on behalf of the members of the public, and then I'll just say we, the royal we, will just answer them in turn.
Okay, Dana, would you like to go first with your questions?
All right, just a moment. I printed them all. I'm just trying to figure out which one. Okay, yeah. So our residents are constantly complaining that police do not respond when they report crime. They say even if police respond, they are slow or nothing changes. So what do you say to this?
Yeah, no, of course, Anna. And the service that victims get is really important to us, first off. And there are a number of different ways that victims can report crime to Thames Valley Police now. You'll know historically there's some issues with the non-emergency number 101. We've now got a really successful web form reporting tool that's been in place now for nearly 18 months, which is really successful, really quick and easy. The reports get triaged in the same way and allocated to officers. Now, without knowing the specifics of those individual instances, it's very difficult for me to to explain or look at why those individuals might have received a poor service from us. Sometimes we do fall short. It might be helpful for me to just explain the systems that are in place when someone reports a crime to us, how it's reviewed, how it's actioned, and how that will dictate the sort of response that's received. You'll be unsurprised to hear we get a lot of calls from the public, and we also get a lot of reported crimes. Some of them really serious, a small minority really serious, but the majority are less so, would fall into what we would call volume crime categories, where we get a lot of reports. Each of the crimes that are reported to us will get triaged either within the control room or within a what we call a smarter resolution team within the policing area. And they look at things like, what's the threat to those involved in the crime, the victim or the location? Are they repeat victims? What's the risk of harm? What's the opportunity there for us to solve it, or in terms of detect the crime, bring somebody to justice, or actually problem solve it and stop it happening again? And depending on what our assessment is, it depends on the level of response that's put in place. If someone rings in and says, I'm being attacked, that will be an immediate response. Someone will go straight round and deal with it there and then as a 999 incident. If it's something like, for example, I've had some spray painting done on my wall, what will happen is it'll go through the smart resolution team, and they'll look at it, they'll contact the victim, and they'll ask them a series of questions to determine whether there are any lines of inquiry. So things like, is the CCTV? Do they know who's done it? Was there anything left at scene to assess any forensic potential? And once that's done, they'll decide whether actually is it worth the police's time to go there and to investigate it further, or do we think actually our limited resources would be best looking at more serious crimes or crimes where there's a greater risk of harm? So that's what happens, and that can sometimes mean that some people, if they report something, it might be the only time they've ever contacted their police in their lives. And it might mean that the interaction they have is that phone call and maybe a follow-up phone call, and that's it. They don't actually see a police officer. Now, for some people, that's not very palatable, and I completely understand why. But the unfortunate thing is it's necessary for us to be able to focus our attentions on those crimes and those incidents which have the greatest risk of harm. Hopefully that explains a bit more without being able to talk about those particular incidents, Nana.
Fair enough, thank you. Should I go on to the next one, or is someone else?
Can do, Nana, yes, please.
I feel like we don't see enough of you around, and I know that there are cuts that is making it difficult for you, but how can you make it better so that you are around the estates a bit more, especially at Fishermead where I live?
Yeah, so visibility is an interesting concept now. There's a chap called Robert Peel who founded the Modern Police Service, and he had a set of principles. They're called the Peelian principles, and they're still very relevant today. And one of those principles is about that police efficiency should be judged not on their visible presence, but actually on the absence of crime and disorder. Now, I have a team of 3 PCs and 7 PCSOs that cover Campbell Park South and Woughton, and it's a very large area. Now, that's a neighbourhood team. That's in addition to the response officers that deal with the 999 calls and other specialist departments such as armed policing or roads policing that deal with their own individual specialisms. What it does mean is that we don't have as many neighbourhood officers as there once was, and the way we try and maximise our visibility is by using hotspot patrols. So there's an evidence base behind it, and what it says is if we provide a visible police presence in a particular area where we're experiencing an issue, a crime, disorder, whatever it might be, that 15 minutes in that area is the absolute best time we can spend in order to have a residual effect on crime and disorder. So we go there for 15 minutes. It has an impact not just on that area, but the areas around it. And the evidence also says that continues for several hours afterwards. So each month I meet with my team, we discuss our patrol plans, we set hotspot patrols where we're doing some problem solving work, or there's a particular issue that's been reported to us by the community, and the officers are tasked to do that. So go there during their tour of duty, and they will do touchdowns, 15-minute touchdowns. They'll come away, they'll go somewhere else, do another job, they'll come back, do 15 minutes there, because that's shown to be the most effective. I know there's another question that you've asked as well, Nana, that I've seen in advance, and this sort of leads me on to it specifically around fish and meat. So last year we changed how we were deploying our officers. So we started deploying officers from the fish and meat office on Vellon again. So currently you've got a PC, which is Jim Adams, who's the officer for fish and meat, for Springfield as well, and Oldbrook. And he's working from there along with 5 PCSOs that both cover Fishermead, but also some of the Woughton areas as well. So the idea behind that is to maximise the amount of time they're spending on the estate, and that's been really successful. The officers have really liked being based back there, and the feedback we've had from the immediate community has been quite positive as well. I mean, the thing with Vellon is it's an office. It's not a station where there's a front counter, and also the station itself isn't that visible. And I actually don't think that it needs to be. Where it is great, because what it does is it enables the officers to spend more time on the area, which is what's important.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nana, can I just hold you there, Nana, please? Brian, can I ask you to ask your main question about numbers?
Yeah, I mean, this is you've more or less sort of slightly touched on that. I know it's a bit political, but out of the anticipated 20,000 extra police officers that are supposed to be provided countrywide, presumably, has this had a positive impact in the Thames Valley area and specifically in Milton Keynes? Now,
Brian, sort of as an open caveat, I don't have the numbers for Milton Keynes, so. In terms of the numbers that Thames Valley Police will get, I don't have the specific number for Milton Keynes. What I can say is that we opened recruitment in June, and that recruitment was both to cover retirements, resignations, sort of natural wastage, but also in order to recruit towards the uplift that Thames Valley Police is getting, which I believe is in the region of about 300 to 400 officers, although I don't have a fixed figure. From that recruitment, we had 338 applications, and interestingly, 24% of those were from people from a black or minority ethnic background. We have a positive engagement and recruitment team, which are a team of experienced officers, and they've been working really hard to try and increase the number of applicants we're getting from people from BAME backgrounds. To make sure that as a force we're much more representative of our communities, and hopefully, although we haven't got the actual final numbers from those applicants, hopefully that will lead to an increase in the number of BAME officers we've got within TVP. So the recruitment process is going well. We're quite lucky in TVP in that we're able to recruit quite well, and those applications we've got mean that we're on course for filling the vacancies and all the uplift numbers that we're meant to have going into June as well. So really, really positive, but unfortunately I haven't got the specific numbers because the force hasn't made those available for MK.
Okay. On the same basis, have we got as many PCSOs as needed?
We've been really lucky throughout the whole of austerity. Whilst we've seen a reduction in the number of geographical neighbourhood officers in Milton Keynes, what we've consistently seen is the same number of PCSOs. So we have around, I want to say it's around 50 in Milton Keynes as a whole, 25 of those being deployed in South Milton Keynes, and that number's been fairly consistent. So whereas other forces have used reductions in PCSO numbers in order to manage budgetary constraints, we've been fairly consistent in the numbers that we've got. In fact, we've got 2 new joiners that are coming to the South Policing team over the next couple of months. One that's going to be based in Bletchley, and the other one that's going to be in Danesborough and Walton. That are covering, I think, one who joined as a PC and the other one who retired. So we're very fortunate. There's no change on the horizon around those numbers as well. And you know, as Brian was saying about 2 of my officers earlier, we've got a really, really good bunch of experienced and committed PCSOs on our area, and they're a real sort of backbone of the team. Real credit to it.
Thank you, Brian. Do you want to continue with your question? Next question.
Yeah. This might be slightly controversial, but I'm old school. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear. So do you think that the stop and search powers are being used strongly enough in our parish, considering some of the problems that there've been over the last 18 months or so?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in stop and search, Brian. I think where it's used proportionately and correctly, and where it's used in a way that treats the people being searched with due grounds, where they're treated with respect, then it can be a really effective tool in reducing and detecting crime. So in Milton Keynes as a whole, over the last 12 months, there was 2,370 stop and searches that were done. 74% of those were for drugs, which actually reflects the community priorities we're hearing from one of our sort of recent digital engagement events. My team as a whole, which comprises myself, another sergeant at 9 PCs, so that's covering the whole of South Milton Keynes, so below the H6, excluding the bowl. We as a team done 374 stop and searches in the last 12 months, and 33.5% of those have had a positive outcome. So that means where something has been found, either that's being looked for within that power. So if you're doing a stop and search under the Misuse of Drugs Act, we found drugs, or you're doing a stop and search under that power and you found something else that's prohibited, like a weapon, or it's resulted in their arrest. So actually, my team are competent and confident in using their stop and search powers. They use them proportionately, and by that I mean we're getting a very good return on what we're doing. We're not searching people unnecessarily. But also it's really important that there's a good degree of scrutiny around the use of the power, because I understand the controversies around it. So in Milton Keynes, we have a proportionality panel that's linked in with the IAG, so the Independent Advisory Group, that will review stop and searches. They'll review body-worn video footage of the officers' stop and searches and allow them to look at the grounds that are being recorded and to see how the powers are being used by officers on a day-to-day basis. All the officers have body-worn video that all will use it for the vast majority of their stop and searches, unless there's an operational reason why they can't. For example, them being in plain clothes if there's an operational need. But I'm always happy to have a conversation about stop and search. I think it is a really effective tool, but on the caveat that it's used properly, and by that I mean the people that are searched are dealt with respectfully, that the powers are appropriately explained to them, and that it's used in a targeted way, in a proportionate way as well.
Thank you, Ross. Nana, do you want to finish off your questions now? Which, as we were talking about the amount of drug stuff, and I know you've got one in there about cannabis.
Yeah, I was just saying, why is there so much weed on the estate? What are you doing? These things are easily accessible to our children. They're around it all the time. And what are you doing to curb it?
Yeah. So there's sort of two elements to cannabis use that I find in terms of the complaints that we get from members of the public. One is the drug dealing, the criminality, the exploitation, the violence that goes with that, particularly if you're looking at county lines and even within some of the local lines and some competition between them. And then you also have the antisocial element of it as well. It's illegal, and the smell and use is antisocial. And I find that a lot of people, particularly, will report stuff because of the smell and the impact it's having. In terms of what we're doing and what my team is doing, drug supply in particular was identified, as I said, as a priority for the area during a recent digital survey that we carried out. So we're conducting stop and searches, and like I said, we are getting a good return on that. We regularly run plainclothes operations and proactive operations in order to deal with that type of offending. There's another 2 days that are planned this month. We also bid for force resources, and by that I mean either the public order force reserve or some of the joint operations units resources, so like the armed policing or dog section, and they will come to the areas that we task them. So we've done that on Fishermead before. We'll also look very much to develop intel, execute warrants. We did one on Fishermead recently under the Misuse of Drugs Act. And also we use ASB legislation, so things like community protection warnings and community protection notices. there's been a lot of that have been issued to individuals on Fisher Mead that aren't necessarily from the estate, but were gathering there and were involved in the use and the supply of drugs. So for us, it's very much about building that picture. What we struggle with, and my officers probably tell me the same, is more about the intelligence from the community about who's dealing, how they're dealing, when they're dealing, and we really rely on that information either through anonymous reporting on Crime Stoppers or it being passed to officers. And where we do get information, we can develop it and we can look to take action. But we very much rely on that reporting as well to support what we're doing.
I think on that as well, with the feedback to any of your residents that say we're not turning out to certain jobs, if you're feeding it into us, it might be there's lots of work going on in the background, the PCSO's on the ground developing it, that we can then make into a bigger job that we can develop. But they might think that they've called it in and they've not seen us actually do anything, when behind the scenes we are actually in intel and doing work behind it.
Any information is good information.
Thank you. Cheers, Chris. Okay, you have a list of questions there from Councillor Carl Cavarana. Carl, do you want them just to answer those, or do you want to list them yourself?
They can just answer them. Same with listing them.
You've got a list there of questions from Carl Cavarana, Ross.
Yeah, no. So the first question that Carl asks is, what are our plans around engagement with age groups that might be carrying knives? So sort of paraphrase that, but I think that's what the crux of it. The answer is an awful lot. An awful lot is being done around knife crime. And I don't mean that necessarily around just enforcement, so catching people with knives and convicting them of those offences, but particularly around early engagement within schools and with young people at risk of becoming involved in knife crime, about promoting safe public spaces through the use of weapons sweeps, which we've sort of pioneered within Milton Keynes and shared more widely, and also around engaging with people who we identify as being at risk of carrying knives, and then working with them intensively, either to divert them to partners and support, and there might be employment opportunities, or dealing with some of the social element, the social side of things. So we have a problem-solving team in Milton Keynes, and as part of that, there's an advanced reduction team. They have a cohort that they maintain of around 30 people who are at risk of being involved in violence. A significant proportion of those are what we would term habitual knife carriers. So they're people that have been involved in a knife-related incident or been caught carrying a knife twice in the last 2 years. And the work that they do, they have the specific officers who are trained as navigators. So where they identify somebody at being risk, the navigators will go speak with the individual, find out what social care provisions are in place, find out how we can support them. Because somebody that's got employment, that's working, or that's in training or education is less likely to become involved in street level crime, is less likely to carry a knife. And we've had some real successes with it. Similarly, where we try that engagement and that intervention approach and we don't get much engagement, then we move to an enforcement standpoint where we're looking to catch and convict these individuals through use of stop and search. When schools are functioning as they should do, which they will be going forward, we do a lot of work within schools to provide sort of training and awareness around carrying knives, the risks to individuals. And I'm just trying to think what else as well. We run OPSEPTA as well, which is a national week of action around knife crime. We've run that since the end of 2017. It's run biannually, and that includes both sort of proactive task patrols, the weapons sweeps we spoke of, and we've been really successful in recovering weapons from public spaces.
Last week we had a find.
Yeah.
As well in Oldbrook.
In Oldbrook as well. There was one that was found in Oldbrook. And for those that aren't aware, those weapon sweeps, what we do is we search public spaces, and the idea is to locate weapons that ideally have been concealed to be readily available for use in crime. Often we locate weapons that may have been discarded, and then it's just reducing the risk to the public. So the fact that a kid won't then come across it by accident or potentially hurt themselves, or that it's removed from that public space altogether. So
we do it at the family centres as well to make sure we encompass all family members,
Yeah.
young, old, parents who might not know what to look out for, that kind of thing, and educate everybody.
Yeah.
When you're talking about discarded knives, Ross, we actually have our own landscape team that are finding stuff in the bushes that are being dealt with straight away.
Yeah, and that's good, Terry. And I think actually there's a bit of work that we could do outside of this forum. If your landscape team are able to, create an audible record of where they're finding those knives, then that gives us a better idea of where to target our patrols, where to conduct some of our sweep activity as well. So that would be really useful if we could tie in about that as well.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to continue with Carl's question?
Yeah, no, of course. Are the plans to? So there was 2 questions about schools, particularly around COVID. So one was around large groups gathering once schools return, and the other was about making sure they don't meet up outside of school. So we engage with all the schools on the area really regularly. There's a large responsibility that schools have for reinforcing the messaging around social distancing before and after school. And where there's issues identified, we'll work with the school to address those. And if we are finding breaches and issues, and the PCSOs are patrolling now that the schools are back as of today, and where we do find breaches, we use a 4E's approach. So engage with them, explain what the risks are and why the rules are in place, encourage them to disperse, and then enforcement as a last resort. And that approach is one that we've used throughout the pandemic, and it's been really successful, both in maintaining our legitimacy, but also dealing with gatherings in a low-key, proportionate way, where we've still got the ability to enforce things if we aren't met with encouraging signs. And then there's a couple of others. One was how parish councils can help support us in our aims. And I think you mentioned about the landscaping element of the parish council. I think where we're looking at location-based problem solving, where there's environmental measures we can put in place around removal of or cutting back of some hedging or undergrowth to increase natural visibility. That would be very useful with some of our problem solving work that we do. And similarly, using your established channels and your links within your communities to support our engagement, be that around crime prevention for a particular emerging trend, or when we're seeking consultation around priorities, or running this forum like you have tonight. It just goes to show the benefits that there are to us working really closely together. You asked about grants, particularly around looking towards funding for an all-weather pitch. There's stuff that we can explore. I know that we have got a significant amount of funding from the Home Office about violence reduction, and there's also grants that are available from the PCC as well. So somebody, I can't remember who, apologies, mentioned about speaking with Matthew Barber, who's running to be the next PCC for Thames Valley Police. The PCCs have a budget and funding for projects, and that sort of facility officially we would be incredibly supportive of, because particularly for that age group there's a lack of provision, and actually it would be really beneficial. I mean, we have a lot of issues over at Leadenhall with the AstroTurf there, with people getting into it and causing issues. And I actually think if there was a proper facility provided within Campbell Park South itself, I think that would be very well used, and be a real asset to the community as well. And then the last one was around engagement and how the parish could engage positively with young people. And Sian and I had a conversation before the meeting about Woughton and some of the youth work.
Yeah, the Woughton seems to have quite a lot of youth work, and I think obviously we've not spoke to you for quite a while, but when we were doing our last community forums, the youth work side of it from Campbell Park, there didn't seem to be as much. So again, looking at different provisions that we can look for, how we can try and engage with different youths, different groups. If we could do that as a team, as opposed to the council doing one bit and us replicating it or doing something slightly different. If we can identify groups of people where we could do it, what provisions we do need, and then work together to try and increase the activities for youths on Campbell Park.
Thank you, Sean. I like the sound of that. I want to finish off with the questions that were sent in. So, Nana, I believe you've got another question there, haven't you?
I kind of think they've answered it, really. I was asking how they make themselves more accessible, but he talked about their new way of reporting and, the way that they rotate, the way they're on the council. So I think he's kind of answered that already. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brian, do you want to finish your questions?
Yeah, I've got a few things. Just very quickly, as I missed on my own bits. The latest fashion seems to be theft of catalytic converters and things like that on cars, especially in this area. How high is this on your priorities, considering it is, I suppose you could say, a civil crime and people just claiming the insurance, but it's the inconvenience that it causes more than anything else, I think.
Yeah.
But it's definitely increasing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there, Brian. So all of the crime types gets reviewed at a tasking meeting that's chaired by the LPA commander every 2 weeks, and catalytic converter thefts are being monitored through that tasking and coordination group. What we have found is that there is a real gap around investigative opportunities to do with catalytic converters. And for those that aren't aware of it, so catalytic converters, they are part of your emission system in your car. They contain a number of rare metals. They are worth a considerable amount of, not inconsiderable amount of money when they're scrapped. Now, there is legislation that now means that all scrap transactions should be done with card and not cash. And we regularly each year will do work with the Environment Department in the council to audit scrap dealers as an aside. But no, we've seen a large number of offences. Typically, they're targeting Jazzes, Honda Jazzes, and Toyota Priuses.
Yeah.
The MO they'll jack the car, use a reciprocating saw to cut the catalytic converter out of the exhaust. While usually there's one or two people, a driver, somebody that's typically armed with a weapon and a face covering sometimes, and sometimes not. It all depends on the circumstances. And they'll cut it off, put it in the car, and off they go. And what we'll do is we'll get a series of offences on one estate, and then they'll move on to another estate. And what we're doing to support the investigation of that, neighbourhood officers will attend every single catalytic converter theft in Milton Keynes. They will go to the offence where previously we would have triaged it over the phone in much the same way I spoke to Nara about earlier. But we will go in every case, explore every single opportunity, be it forensic, CCTV, witnesses or otherwise. There's also a dedicated detective that owns the crime series within Milton Keynes to look at investigative opportunities. But it's really, really difficult because they're organised criminals. They will recce and target vehicles where there isn't CCTV. They'll intimidate people if there's any intervention, and they won't stop for police if they're pursued. But that said, there is a number of covert and overt operations going on in Milton Keynes at the moment to address it.
I think it's worth saying in relation to that as well. Those operations are being supported by the neighbourhood and policing teams as well in order to try and catch those offenders. And the PCSO has been working incredibly hard in the evidence gathering and also with the distribution of leaflets and material for people to kind of protect themselves or to make themselves more difficult to have their catalytic converters stolen. I think in the local area, the PCSOs have distributed over 250 leaflets to different estates based on the information that we have in relation to those thefts.
Thank you, Chris. Right, okay. Do
you want me to do the residents' concerns that I've got?
No, hold off on that one, Brian, if you won't mind. Okay. I've got three other people with their hands up. Dominic, is yours a question about process of what we're doing, or is it an actual question from a...
Chair, it's just a reflection at the moment. We've obviously got the early evening crowd watching us, so I'm pleased to say that we're now into double figures in terms of people watching us on YouTube. Thank you to those people that have submitted questions. They are noted, and we will come back to those in due course. So just if anybody on the stream has got a question that they'd like to ask, please do so now so that it doesn't get missed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Dominic. David, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, police officers. Is it PC Ross?
No,
Sergeant. Yeah, seems to be Inspector David.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, a couple of points. I've attended a couple of police forums in the past.
Yes.
And one of the things that the officers took away that residents had concern, parking on pavements.
Yeah.
Now that just never seems to go away. It's getting worse, and I wonder sometimes whether the police have any input when planners are making changes to the structure of houses, because at times people are allowed to fill in these garages and carports, and then there's nowhere else for the car to go. But it's about time that people will stop, because I see mums and toddlers, people in mobility scooters can't get past them. The roads are too narrow for that, but there's never any action. And part of my second question is that every time I come onto Fishermead, there's always cars parked on the roundabouts, especially where the units are. Now, I believe the landlords or the tenants there have been warned several times, but it happens on quite a daily basis on the times I go on to Fishermead. And I just wonder why it's tolerated for so long. You know, it's parking on Fishermead's bad enough with all the lorries and everything else that's parked there, but then parking on roundabouts, you know, if someone starts getting tickets, it might put a stop to it. So it's parking on pavements, and it's also parking outside these units. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
No problem, David. So to answer the first part around police input on planning applications, so large-scale planning applications, we have a planning officer, because the police are consulted as part of that, mostly around sort of environmental design to do with crime prevention. I will review planning applications and with that advisor. For example, we did one recently on Springfield that we didn't support because it was an infill development, and we felt that it would be detrimental to sort of crime and disorder. And then similarly, there's one in Netherfield where they're developing around Cripps Lodge, which we were very supportive of, because actually it supports the regeneration of the area. And the development itself did have, you know, due consideration to parking and access issues and things of that nature. So first and foremost, David, the police are a stakeholder in dealing with parking, but we are not the primary agency to manage it. And I need to make that really, really clear. We have very limited powers to deal with willful obstruction as an offence within limited circumstances. Historically, we've used that. We've also used warning notices and things of that nature. But where it comes to, as I'm sure you're aware, the enforcement of parking and double yellows and the implementation of double yellows, parking was decriminalised in Milton Keynes a long time ago, and that falls to Milton Keynes Council to manage and enforce. We will often support parking, particularly around sensitive and vulnerable locations, and by that I mean schools in particular. And work with junior road safety officers in the schools themselves to engage with parents and encourage responsible parking. What I would say is that we talked a little bit already about how few officers I have, whilst I have a really committed team. But if I am getting them to spend their time dealing with parking as an issue, it means I'm not then not dealing with other issues which are potentially more harmful and of higher risk to the community. So it's not that we won't deal with parking. If somebody's obstructing the highway and it's causing an issue, then we will use enforcement where appropriate.
And in Fishermead, the parking outside the shops and on the roundabouts goes back to our engagement. If somebody's there, we tell them, and generally they always move on. And at that point, we're not going to enforce it because they've listened, they've complied, and they've moved on. Yeah.
But a lot of the issues themselves, I mean, we worked with, through the forums and worked with the residents and needs around line parking on, worked around Lloyd's as well. And that's sometimes where we can support the dealing with parking, is through the long-term problem solving, through speaking with partners and looking at what solutions are available. I hope that answers your question, David. I'm sorry it wasn't very specific, but I just need to be realistic about what my team can achieve and what powers we have. But we'll always support and work with the community, but it's just within those parameters.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question which you may not be able to answer? We are aware that the Chief Constable can actually give PCSOs the authority to issue tickets for parking. Your thoughts on that, please? So
PCSOs can give tickets for willful obstruction. I know that apart from in a very few areas where parking hasn't been decriminalised in Thames Valley Police, I think it's probably the Royal Borough of Windsor Maidenhead is probably the only one I think that I can think of. But I know that there will be no appetite for the Chief Constable to do that on the basis that there are a finite amount of resources and actually PCSOs now, if they're dealing with parking, then they're not investigating the catalytic converters or they're not providing visibility at the hotspots, and it's a fine act. But I'm sure if there was an exceptional need, it could be looked at. But the council is still there.
Thank you, Ross. Just another quick one on the parking issue. Full pavement obstruction parking. So it's nothing to do with them. It is a police matter.
Yeah.
So where do we go with this?
I'm sure they do. I would say that it still remains an issue for them because ultimately they should be looking at schemes of residents parking and seeking engagement and consultation around that if there's a significant issue that's causing people to park on the pavement consistently. And this is what I'm saying, in the very few situations where there's willful obstruction, so somebody in a wheelchair is using a footpath and they can't go along the footpath because it's being obstructed by a car, we will attend. If necessary, we will ticket the car, we will remove it, we will do whatever. But it has to be in those more extreme situations.
Thank you. And on Fisher Mead, Ross, it is that problem around Frank Hill Court, obviously.
Yes, yeah, no.
Thank you. Thank you for that. There was a question that popped up there. Can CPPC employ their own parking warden? And I think I'm not sure as we can. And the only person I can think that would answer that would be Dominic.
I can tell you what Woughton have looked into.
Go on then.
Woughton did exactly the same. I think you were involved, Terry, at the beginning. They were looking at employing their own parking warden. They were going to have to pay for the parking warden themselves, but Milton Keynes Council would receive all of the parking fines.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was. And it's still the same. Thank you for that. Tracy, I believe...
On the same sort of thing, Terry, just briefly.
Yeah.
I know I've said it to you before, a couple of times with parking, where I've seen residents badly parking, especially in the evenings, I have knocked on doors under the pretense saying, well, the problem that you've got, you're causing is you could not get them, just reasoning with them.
It does work. Tracy, I believe you've got some questions come off the YouTube.
Yes, we have a question related to electric and whether they're doubling up on their use of them, and also that it's been noticed that the scooters are being used for the supply of drugs. So your comments and thoughts on that, please.
No, criminals are an ingenious bunch, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were using them. So more generally about electric scooters, legislation where they sit, they're a mechanically propelled vehicle. They're covered under the Road Traffic Act. However, because there's a national trial that's going on, and Milton Keynes is really lucky because, as we often are, to be at the forefront of these new and exciting schemes, there's a trial. So if you're using one of the rental scooters within Milton Keynes, they should be checking ID. They should be limiting it to over 18s. They can use them without having to have insurance and a license, which is everything you would have to do if you had a private scooter. So in essence, if you are using one that's rented in the schemes are limited to over 18-year-olds. They require the ID. If we find somebody who's under 18 and they're on them, we can stop them. We can take the details back. We can
revoked.
Yeah, memberships have been revoked. Where we're getting people using them, there's an approach, and it's very similar to the approach we used with COVID about engaging, explaining, encouraging, enforcing. So if somebody is stopped by a police officer or PCSO in Milton Keynes an electric scooter, their details are taken, it's recorded within our system, and if they're stopped again, then they will have the scooter seized under the Road Traffic Act. They'll be reported for having no insurance. The scooter will be crushed into a million pieces, and they will be expected to pay a fine and have points on their licence. It is, unfortunately, and people have, identified and said, well, it's not fair that you're able to use the hire scheme and pay the hire companies, but we're not able to have them ourselves. Unfortunately, that is where we are. I think my officers use a great deal of discretion around scooters because they are really widely used in Milton Keynes. And in all honesty, the wonderful thing about Milton Keynes is it's got some fantastic sustainable transport links in terms of the redways. And more so than any area, it's ideally suited to it. But where we do find people using them antisocially or using them to enable crime, we will take appropriate action.
Thank you. Anything else, Tracy?
We've got a list of questions that were submitted in advance from a resident from Oldbrook that
Yes.
I don't know if Brian wanted to cover
Brian, do you want to put those through?
Yeah, I mean, part of it has been answered. One of the questions was about parking on the street, blocking pavements, but we've covered that really as much as we can. It's not, as you say, there's no specific penalties in law to stop this in some way. You can only try and.
I would say, I've got that question in front of me, and what I'm going to do is I'll pass that on to one of the PCSOs. That I'll ask them to speak with the business in question, because engagement can bear fruit. If the parking has come from a particular building or promotes a responsible parking. So I'll take that away from today. If you could pass that on to the resident.
Okay, and the other question they brought up was about the speeding along the Oldbrook Boulevard by the cricket green. I mean, I know we had a trial, was it a year ago, 18 months ago, where we were using the speed cameras, weren't we? But along that stretch, but is that something that can be resumed more?
What was the outcome of your use of the speed indication device, Brian? Can you recall? Do you know?
Yeah, people see us standing there and slow down. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I would say that Milton Keynes encompasses a lot of roads. Where there's a particular issue, roads policing will do enforcement at those locations. They are probably primarily concerned with some different locations where we've had accidents, serious accidents, because again they're very limited officers. There's also a mobile van, but that requires appropriate sighting, which wouldn't, to my knowledge of it, wouldn't actually fit in well with Oldbrook Boulevard. So in answer to your question, I would encourage the use of the speed indication device. I can pass on to the roads policing team, but what I can't promise is a lot of enforcement at this point.
Do you find that's dropped down the list of priorities then, really, to sort of have these mobile speed cameras, for example?
Yeah, no, so the force still uses them and utilises them, but where they deploy them tends to be in locations where there's been serious injury or fatal road traffic collisions. So there's
a lot of the estates have been designed now, so they don't have the capacity for cars to be able to create those.
And it limits it. So within Oldbrook Boulevard, you've obviously got the spaces between the roundabouts, but it limits the degree to which people can accelerate. So I'm not saying that some people don't accelerate and brake harshly and exceed the speed limits, but it's probably a minority of the total amount of traffic is speeding. So we just have to focus our efforts where we think it's going to have the greatest success of reducing serious injury.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
One of the other one was about a flat tyre of a car. Presumably you've looked at that and perhaps dealt with it?
I haven't. I'm going to push this one back onto the resident, Brian. If he thinks it's untaxed, he can check through the DVLA website. He can report it direct to the DVLA, and if it's not taxed, they'll remove it. And also Milton Keynes Council also deal with abandoned vehicles. So if it was on the road, we wouldn't necessarily, as the police, have a power to remove. Milton Keynes Council does. They'll put a, I think it's a 7-day notice on it.
Yeah.
If it's been abandoned for a specific time. So I push that back onto the resident, empower them and say, look, these are the reporting tools they can use and see how they get on. If they still find themselves butting heads against a brick wall, send me an email and we'll see what we can do.
No, it does work because I've checked a couple before in the past, found they're not taxed and insured, and reported it through the system by checking the VLA system.
Yeah, that's really good.
Excellent.
Best way to do
Thank
it.
you.
Okay. Back to you,
The
Terry.
only person we haven't heard from is Crispina. Now, Crispina, you're on Willen, which isn't covered by the South team, but if you have anything, they will pass it forward to the North team.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. At the moment, I spoke to Val with regards to what's going on. I think the only issue that we have, but that's been caught on CCTV, is people trying to steal cars. So they're going around trying to open up cars, and if it does open, they'll try and steal it. But I think a number of them have been reported on CCTV. That's the only issue at the moment.
Yeah.
Willen Park is overcrowded, but I guess that's not an issue that you would deal with. But I think that's another issue that we're struggling with. Whenever the weekend comes along, people just go to Willen Park, and there's no, when I say no policing in quote marks, there's nobody trying to stop people from overcrowding.
Yeah. So obviously, Christina, the Willen Lake and Willen Park is part of the Parks Trust land. I know they have rangers who will do that. I won't go into too much detail, but I'm working with their chief executive around looking at a community safety accreditation scheme, which is in the final stages of approval. So I won't go into too much more detail with that, because that will be for them to publish. But what I would say is it will go a long way to dealing with ASB within the park area. And that's jointly, there was some work with the council as well around that. So that's really, really promising. So just watch this space around that in particular. And with like theft of vehicles, cars are really difficult to steal nowadays. We still get a lot of acquisitive crime where people will try door handles opportunistically, and they'll steal things of cash value, typically coins, money, sat-navs less so nowadays, but valuables that are left within the car. So it's just a reminder to residents really to secure your cars, make sure that they are locked. And similarly, where we are getting thefts of vehicles, they're typically keyless thefts. So a lot of cars now have keyless entry, keyless ignition, and what the car thieves will typically do is they'll identify a car, and they will either burgle the house and take the keys to take the car, because otherwise you can't hotwire it or start it with a screwdriver like you could in the 90s. You now need that. Or they'll use something sophisticated called a relay device. So if you've got your keyless car fob near the door, they'll place an electronic relay device on the key, and it'll allow them to start the car right away. So there's stuff you can do around placing your key fob in it's called an RFID pouch, but effectively it's a little Faraday cage that stops the key fob's signal going out. They can be bought online for £5, and it stops relay theft. It stops the car accidentally unlocking itself because you've left the key too close to the front door. So little bits of crime prevention advice like that are worth their weight in gold in helping people keep themselves safe.
Thank you very much. Crispina, are you finished there?
Yes, thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christina.
Tracy.
We had another question that came through in advance from a resident, particularly about noise that they were unhappy about in residential streets from high performance cars, and what, if anything, could be done about that. Okay.
So there's a PSPO in place in Milton Keynes that covers car cruising and also antisocial use of vehicle. That specifically relates to revving of cars and things like that, but mostly it's to do with static type displays. I don't know which particular area that is, Tracy, but in terms of cars themselves, there's legislation, for example, like Section 59 of the Police Reform Act that lets us deal with antisocial causes of harassment, alarm, distress. But dealing with construction and use road traffic offences like exhausts are difficult because it requires noise monitoring equipment, which we don't have, and you've effectively got to show a difference between the exhaust as it was constructed by the manufacturer and what it is now. The biggest issue around exhausts are, I would say, MOT stations that are passing these cars, because they shouldn't be passing MOTs when their exhaust is missing a silencer, or it's got significantly large pipes, or it's significantly loud. They shouldn't be passing MOTs. So typically, the people who are using exhausts like that on their cars will remove them for the MOT and then put them back on afterwards. But some less reputable garages will pass them with them still in place. And there's a lot of work that goes on within roads policing to identify and deal with those test centres in conjunction with the DVSA as well. But yes, there is in specific circumstances there are things we can do, but in terms more generally. It can be problematic, being honest, Tracy.
If it's a neighbour or somebody you know that is always there, Milton Keynes environmental health officers would have the recording equipment. So again, they can use it in houses, and if it is a neighbour, a car that's always there at a certain time, they can use their recording equipment. Yeah. But if it's passing vehicles going through, then that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I think that's where this issue is in that area that this one came from. And I think that's what the problem is. And of course, we had a meeting with Craig and Paul on Friday, and it's something to do also with these new high performance vehicles like the Volkswagen Golf, where you can take your foot off the throttle and it will give a backfire, and it's been designed in. So it's unfortunately it's absolutely ridiculous, but there you go.
Yeah.
I'm going to just ask one very quick question. I am a motorcyclist, and I live at the side of H7. I live right beside Chaffron Street, and if you lay in bed at night where I live, and the racing round Chaffron Street, Grafton Street, Saxon Street, up into Child's Way and around again from sports bikes, is something that is, to me, is abhorrent, because it's idiots like that are making it bad for motorcyclists. But it is, I think, very dangerous racing, and of course illegal if they are racing on the public highway. Is that something that you could pass on to the roads policing team, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Chris is a motorcyclist, so I'm pretty sure it's not. Pretty sure it's not Christopher that's racing up and down. But no, absolutely, we will pass that on. Anecdotally, we're not getting a lot of reports around the area of that sort of driving. But Terry, I'm happy to take that away.
Thank you very much. Both myself and Carl are motorcyclists, and ours won't be doing that. We ride Harleys, so they're not quick enough. So, okay, Tracy, have you got another question there?
But one last public question was relating to neighbourhood watch schemes, particularly about whether any action had been taken or how it could be to re-establish a neighbourhood watch scheme in Oldbrook, but similarly anywhere else, I suppose, too.
So neighbourhood watch schemes they're a form of social action, and what they often require is, what they do require is a coordinator, and a coordinator who empowers the residents around them to form a scheme, and they need to do the groundwork first. So if there's somebody that is interested in running a scheme or starting a scheme in a particular area, if they look on the Neighbourhood Watch website, there's some information about things that they need to do and consider in order to get a scheme up and running. And if they were interested in running such a scheme, by all means, speak to one of my officers, drop us an email, and we will support them in getting that up and running, because it's a fantastic thing. It's a really, really powerful community tool. And but yeah, just start the ball rolling. They just need to have a look online, get some interested and like-minded residents together, consider the things that they need to do, because they'll sign up to like GDPR, because they'll be controlling information. But
step-by-step process.
Yes,
it really does lead you through it.
Thank you. Tracy, your hand's still up. You've got another question there? No? Okay. Just a quick one on neighbourhood policing with regard to our friendly beggars outside the co-op on Fishermead and outside Lidl on Oldbrook. They get cleared off within 20 minutes, they're back again. Is there anything that we can actually, I know you guys are giving them orders to, antisocial behaviour orders to clear. Is there anything that's stronger that can be used to make sure that they are removed and possibly stay away? Because they are harassing an awful lot of people, and especially at the co-op where you've got the older people coming down from Frankel Court. I had to escort one of them coming out because the old lady was being in a wheelchair, was being harassed by this beggar there. Again, is it something we can do?
Yeah, no, it is. So the notices you've spoken about are community protection warnings and community protection notices. So there is a current piece of problem solving work that we're doing around Lidl in particular, because that was where the greater problem was identified around aggressive begging and just begging in general. A number of individuals have been identified and issued CPWs and CPNs. So a CPW, it's a notice being given under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act. And what it allows the police to do, or the local authorities, to tell somebody, this is the behaviour you're doing, it's antisocial, don't do it. If they then continue with that behaviour, having received that warning, they're issued a notice, a community protection notice, which says, this is the behaviour you've been doing, you've still been doing it, now if you do it, you're going to get arrested. And why we use those warnings is because it allows us to gather evidence for something called a CBO, or criminal behaviour order. And it's effectively a replacement for the ASPO that was made famous in the early noughties. And effectively, the court will make an order on conviction against the individual saying you can't do these behaviours, these things, and if you do, you're in contempt of court, and they'll fine them and they'll send them to prison. So the reason we use those notices, Terry, is to actually identify them, address their behaviour, and where they don't listen, don't take heed, then they're going to be put onto the CBO. And there's a few that we are working with other neighbourhood teams about where they've consistently offended in CMK. There's a lot of work done there. That's why they've been dispersed to Oldbrook. And similarly, we're not naive enough to think that by targeting the behaviour on Oldbrook, it's not going to disperse to Fishermead and some of the surrounding estates. And what we're trying to do is encompass both of the estates within the warning notices that are being given in anticipation of that behaviour continuing. A lot of it's not just location specific, it's just about the behaviour. So there's a coordinated response that will target and identify the offenders. And then there's some engagement with the businesses. Because I know that Lidl are looking to redevelop the site, which actually I think will remove the parade from there. But where those businesses go, do they go across the road? In which case we might need to look at working around there. But similarly, the long-term redevelopment will remove that parade, and I would suspect will reduce the problem fairly significantly. But it's an issue we're aware of, and we're working really hard on at the moment. And Jim Adams is leading that piece of work.
And Terry, with that one, if we're doing the enforcement, the message that could be sent from the parish is just reminding people not to be given things, and just make the reward less on this area so they don't come outside the shops.
Yeah, that can be done, I'm sure, through our communications team, on our social media and everything. Brian, see your hands up.
Yes, I have an idea that I'd like to pass on to the police people here that may help. A couple of years ago, when I went to one of my regular breakfast meetings, we had a talk given to us from a Bedfordshire detective inspector about cybercrime.
Yeah.
Which is obviously one of the fastest growing things. With all these new tools we have now, like this Teams meeting things, I wonder if it's possible at some stage for your guys that deal with that, we could put something together in the same way that residents could log on through YouTube to be guided of what to do to stop it and to help and different things, because it was extremely informative and eye-opening. And it's something that it is still the growing fastest thing within crime, and a lot simpler for everybody. It may be a good idea to come from your perspective, if you like, to put that across to residents.
Yeah, no, Brian, we traditionally would deliver those sorts of crime prevention packages within schools a lot of the time. But also we would do them with our community forums and also some face-to-face engagement with particularly like sheltered housing. I think it's a really good idea. I'd be more than happy to take it away and work with you guys to deliver something similar as a bit of a trial and see how it goes. So yeah, very good suggestion, and we'll quite happily work with you on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tracy, have you got anything else from the YouTube? No. Okay. Unless anybody else wants to ask any more questions, I'd just like to finish off with the fact that Thames Valley Police get an awful lot of criticism from around Milton Keynes, and it's not founded. Most of it isn't founded. There's been two things that have happened recently within our parish, and one of them, very sadly, was the death of Lewis in Springfield. And for the team from the reaction team to be there as quick as they was, and to deal with the issue and to have an arrest even almost immediately was absolutely fantastic. And I know that all the parish councillors on here, thank you very much for the work that was done on that. And also the fact that the use of the antisocial behaviour closure orders that have been working around the area have been very welcomed by this parish council. We had one on Oldbrook and one on Fishermead very recently. They do work. We know they work. It takes the issue away for at least 3 months, and the chances are they never come back. So again, I'd like to pass on my thanks to the whole of the TVP family in Milton Keynes for the work they complete. Finally, I had a request from one of our other councillors that lives in Bosney Place. Can they get the horses to come back down there, please? His roses need some more fertiliser.
Thank you, Terry. That incident you speak of was very sad, and I was one of the first officers that were there with a public order medic when we were working on that day, and it is incredibly sad. And any sort of loss of life is absolutely a tragedy, and it's good to hear from the community that the response was felt to be robust and timely, but just incredibly sad. In terms of the horse manure, absolutely. I will have a word with Mounted's ear and see whether we can offer them some polos or something to get them down. And closure orders, you are completely right. It's a piece of legislation that we've underused, and actually our team now are really confident in using them, and where they're appropriate, we will absolutely consider it. And there's the two forms, Terry. You've got a partial order where the resident can remain, and we'll use that to safeguard people where there's concerns around cuckooing or exploitation or vulnerability. And then similarly, you've got the full closure order, similar to the address we used an address on Vellon incredibly effectively, and then it's working with the housing provider, be that the council or the housing association, both in the consultation phase, but also where the grounds exist, taking possession of the property during the closure order period to prevent sort of the reignition of that antisocial behaviour or the criminality that was going on around the address. So it's good that you've highlighted it, because I think we find them incredibly effective, and it's good to hear that feedback.
Thank you very much. I think we've exhausted the questions that are there. Is there anything else that you guys want to add?
I would like to say thank you to Tracy. Obviously, our Campbell Park forum over the years, we've had a few really good ones, then it's tailed off. So to get this back up and running, and it be so helpful that we just really had to turn up and answer the questions, it's been really beneficial.
Thank you. Yes, I must thank you, Tracy.
Yeah. Just to ask Terry very quickly, often within the forums we ask for community priorities. Obviously this is an inaugural one, and it might be that if we're looking to follow up on this, which I think would be really positive, that we could include maybe a survey or digital survey of some form in advance of the forum, where we could gather those priorities and maybe discuss what we're going to do, because that allows us to be more accountable to you, rather than just on general issues and general questions, you can identify priorities to us, and we can follow those up as well.
Thank you, Dominic.
Thank you, Terry. I think we've had an excellent evening so far. A lot of information on what residents can actually do when they find themselves to be a victim of crime, but just importantly, possibly how they can prevent themselves from becoming victims of crime as well. Obviously, you can't be everywhere all at the same time, and kind of getting your profiles across the estates is always going to be a challenge. We put out a quarterly magazine to go 6,000 households per quarter, and it's just a thought really as to whether you could use that as a kind of a potential vehicle to put across some of the good information that you've shared with us this evening, including how residents can sort of help themselves and possibly not being victims of crime in the future, or what they should do if they do find that to be the case. And just picking up on the idea of priority setting for future forums, we carry out an annual consultation which gets a very, very high response from our residents. So there is the potential for some partnership working on that. We find that 1 in 10 households respond, at least 1 in 10 households respond to that. So that there may be some ways that we could work together on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to leave everybody with a final thought. That is that several years ago, I sat with a former LPA commander, Jez Chiarello, where it was stated that Fishermead, Aldbrook, Springfield had no gangs. We now know we have. It's documented. We will be holding a conference of some sorts as soon as we can. We have funding from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, and we have funding put there aside. And of course, it will mean that there will be chances for you guys to be at that conference. In your new role, Ross, you may find you want to be there. We're hoping to have it in July. We'll keep you abreast of exactly what is happening and when this conference will be. As long as Matthew Barber is going to be still there, he will be coming up, and he will be actually at this meeting, and he's hoping to bring Kit Malthouse up as well from the as the Minister of Policing. So this is a big thing coming forward from Campbell Park, and we really are looking forward to dealing with the issues and getting some answers on the issues of the gang culture, knife crime, drugs, and everything else. And I know Nana's very keen to have the issues of FGM and forced marriage and that sort of thing at the same time. And I'm more than welcome that that is going to happen as well. So thank you very much for attending this evening and joining us. And members, thank you very much for attending, and staff, and all those people that are listening on YouTube. I think we've covered an awful lot, and we will come back to hopefully very soon so we can get another one of these off the ground. And yes, I think a poll will be a good idea so we can again set local priorities. Thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your evening.